going to read a passage from Mark, a fairly extended passage. It's actually two pericopes, two different stories that Mark puts back to back. And I think as you listen to these stories, you will hear the incredible contrast between them. And I think that as we read the biblical text, it's really important, as I said too many times, simply because I'm kind of trying to speak against a culture that has made of our sacred text a paper pope. Look for the themes. I think that when we come to our sacred text, we're to look at what options that the sacred text provides us for fueling our story. I remember a counselor who was a good friend of mine once said, Lynn, all we have are our stories. People come in here week after week and week after week, and every single one of them is in a rut. Every single one of them is struggling with something, trauma, etc., etc. And really, the journey that they take with me is to retell their story so that there's a door on the other side that leads into a new possibility. And for some people that takes 6 weeks, some people that takes 6 years, and we know those people who are still stuck in the same rut of a story after 60 years, which reminds me of, I heard this great definition the other day of what is the definition of a rut. It's a casket with the ends removed. So I think the invitation always from the biblical text, it never comes to us as a hammer. It comes to us as quiet whispers. What story would you like to read that is spirit woven and will provide you with restoration and healing? And that, I think, is both on an individual level and a community level. So, these two different stories about two different parties could not be more different. Herod had sent men to arrest John the Baptist because John had been criticizing him for marrying his brother's wife, Herodotus. Nevertheless, Herod feared John because he was a holy man. And so he did protect him despite the protestations of his wife. But Herod, on his birthday, gave a banquet for his buddies. He invited his stepdaughter Salome to come in and dance, and she pleased Herod and his guests so much that in his drunken stupidity, Herod said to the girl, "Lovely, ask me for whatever you wish, and I will give it to you." So she went out and said to her mother, Herodotus, "What should I ask for?" Well, her mother saw a great opportunity for revenge. "The head of John the Baptizer," she replied. And so Salome said to the king, "I want you to give me the head of John the Baptist on a platter." The king was deeply grieved. And yet he had made a promise in front of his cronies. So he sent a soldier with orders to bring John's head on a platter. And he gave it to the girl. And the girl gave it to her mother. So ends the first part. As Jesus went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion for them. When it grew late, his disciples came to him and said, "This is a deserted place, and the hour is now very late. So send them away so that they can go into the surrounding country and villages and buy themselves something to eat. To which he replied, well, how many loaves and fishes have we got here already? Go and find out. When they had found out, they said, we have 5 loaves of bread and 2 fishes. Then he ordered them to get all the people to sit down in groups on the green grass. And taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and blessed and broke the loaves and gave them to his disciples to set before the people. And he divided 2 fish among them all. And all ate, and all were filled. And when they had feasted, they took up 12 baskets full of broken pieces of bread and of fish. So ends the second part. So let's think about that first party. I don't think I've ever preached on that passage before. Where do you go with that, actually? Makes a good contrast, though, doesn't it? First party is not about community. It's not about eating together. There is no passing the peace at that first party. But instead, the passing over of someone's head because of a power struggle and a huge ego. It is in many ways an illustration of what occurs in our world every day. It illustrates power, it illustrates abuse, it illustrates injustice, and a brutal initiative to silence the truth. There is an abundance of food, but no grace and no compassion. The next party is what John Dominic Crossan calls a parable about Jesus in contrast to a parable that Jesus tells. Do you understand the contrast? Right? So it comes to us, it's like the person who wrote Mark is telling us a parable, right? As opposed to Jesus telling us a parable. And it is not meant to come at us as history, but it is meant to come at us as a lesson and a teaching point. There are a couple of versions of it in the Synoptic Gospels, but the operative word in both of those versions is compassion. The compassion of Jesus. The writer sets the parable up with yet another contrast within this parable about Jesus. When evening begins to fall, the disciples want to send the crowd away. To which Jesus responds, you feed them. You feed them. And the story tells us that with 5 loaves and 2 fishes, the multitude was fed and there were 12 baskets of food left. It's a bit like that other parable about Jesus where John speaks of him turning water into wine. And both of these parables about Jesus tell us that when Jesus hosts a party, the food and the wine never run out. When Jesus hosts a party, there is abundance. Although initially all the disciples could see was scarcity. And I think that these two stories side by side are meant to serve as both model and invitation to us and the world in which we live. That first story is all too familiar. I know it's a bit brutal, isn't it? But so is some of life around this world right now. Which party, which story are we called to aspire to? When the Parti Québécois first came to power in Quebec, and does anybody have a better sense of history than I do? What year was that? Is it 76? I want to say yes. I think the referendum was in 80. I think the Parti Québécois, 76. All right. So you all know Paul Scott, our Minister in Association. He at the time was serving a church in Pointe Claire, Quebec, that he and his colleague, Alan Aiken, who we know as well as a friend, had just rebuilt. And it was a thriving suburban English-speaking congregation on the West Island of Montreal. And Paul called a meeting of the elders the week after that referendum. And he declared two things, both to his elders and to the congregation. And I can tell you that there's not a Presbyterian church on the island of Montreal where the minister made this announcement. And it would have been helpful had the minister made that announcement. First he said to his people, both the elders and the community, life will never be the same for us, ever. We don't know what that means exactly, but this province, and in particular, the English-speaking community in this province, is now heading in a vastly new direction. And if we don't come to terms with it, if we just put our head in the sand, I'm not sure what the fruits will be. And so he said, that was his first announcement. And the second announcement was, and therefore we're going to have more parties. Because what's the alternative? By the rivers of Babylon? They were still doing that when I was called to a church in 1989. If only that hadn't been our story. Brené Brown, a social worker who does research in order to facilitate people being in healthier relationships, tells about the challenge of building healthy community in her country, the United States, when there is much that divides it right now. She declares, the question that so many people ask when they wake up every day in my country is, what do I need to be afraid of, or who do I need to be afraid of today, and who can I blame? She indicates that it is this culture that became even more exaggerated after 9/11 that sent her back to church. But these are the three reasons that she goes to church. I think they're interesting. She says, I go to church so that I can sing in community. I go to church so that I can eat in community. As an Episcopalian, she meets her fellow human beings at the rail every Sunday morning to receive bread for her journey. And finally, I go to church so that I can pass peace. She says, in a culture that is frenetic with fear, that is driven by greed, that is dominated by media, and then all kinds of personal sorrows just underneath that surface. She goes to church to remember what it is that connects us all and to practice another way of living together. She goes to church to reinforce an alternative story that has to do with singing together, eating together, and blessing one another. She further suggests that what is at the heart of much of what is going on in her country, and I would argue in the world, is a lack of emotional literacy. Many people do not have the emotional intelligence to work through the challenges of being in a relationship or in a community. And so it doesn't take much for people to go into fear and into blame and into isolation, and it isn't long before that turns into violence and further injustice. Yet singing together, eating together, and passing the peace to one another are ancient rituals that serve to create among us the foundation of an alternative story. Last summer, you will recall that three different households in this circle of friends hosted a summer party. Nothing serious, just an opportunity for fun and to get to know one another a little better. Opportunity, though. Eat, sing, and bless. The same invitation is going out this summer, except the parties will be here on 4 Saturday nights in July, celebrating 4 regions of Canada. It seems to me that if you are going to be a follower of Jesus, you'd better take your parties seriously. Because something happens when we gather around bread and wine. The Sprig Farm food truck will be here at 6 o'clock on each of those Saturday nights, providing a menu that is in keeping with the region that is being celebrated. There will be a variety of beverages, and St. Andrew's will be the host. It is actually part of our biblical tradition that we, in the footsteps of Jesus, host the party for the community. And there will be sharing of food, and there will be raising of voices to sing familiar Canadian tunes, and I'd like to think that we will be passing some peace around. Because friends, there is, or there needs to be, this cascading effect from the ministry of Jesus down to our ministry. So community is built and restored and healed around loaves and fishes. Community is built and restored and healed around bread and wine. And community and you and I are built and restored and healed around the Sprig Farm food truck, some local musicians, and a good beverage. Those are among our foundational spiritual practices. And our Celtic ancestors would say, we practice them daily. What we do here is no different than what we do when we sit at the table, morning, noon, night, alone with others. We simply come together in worship to remind ourselves that every meal is sacramental. That every encounter is an opportunity to pass peace. And that every song will join us to the voice of another. Eat, sing, bless. Now let me pick up one more piece here. A couple of weeks ago, and this was after, a year-long conversation among the elders about what model would support the facilitating of friendships among this circle of friends. So at one point, you would have had a session and elders who each had their own districts. But we've got a different kind of community happening here. And so after talking about it for almost a year, we came up with a model whereby an elder is partnered with a layperson, and the two of them, and honestly, in this era, wordsmithing is a crazy maker. But their task among you is to facilitate friendships. And in friendships, we eat together, and we sing together, and we bless one another. In the next couple of weeks, we'll have a newsletter going out, and you'll be able to see, what little circle have I been put in? And if for any reason you do not want to be part of that circle, you can speak to us. Or speak to me. But the intention is to find ways to respond to that invitation of Jesus, who said, you feed them. You invite them. You find the abundance. You be creative. You heal and include and bless. So certainly that is all of our calling. But 2 weeks ago, we commissioned a particular team who would provide unique focus on that ministry. So throughout this time for contemplation, I wonder if you can think of somebody in your circle of friends who desperately needs to eat, sing, bless, and be blessed. Think about who you might invite to one of these parties. Think about who needs to gather with this circle of friends and participate in rituals that are profoundly spiritual and profoundly transformative. Or maybe you need to think about how these rituals need to continue to heal and restore you at this time.